In this series, we've been talking the truth about sex. We've been going right to God, right to the source, and understanding the truth about God's plan for sex. And so let me break down God's plan for sex. It comes from the book of Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians to be exact, in the Bible. There's this writer, his name is Paul. Paul's talking to a group of people who are trying to figure this thing out. They're trying to figure out how to live in a culture that's obsessed with sex, that sex is everywhere, and they're trying to figure out how they can do the right thing in that culture. If Paul was writing to this culture, there'd be a lot of similarities. He'd be writing to us saying, hey, you guys are pretty obsessed with this sex thing. He says this in the Bible. He says, God's will is for you to be holy, to stay away from all sexual sin, all sexual disobedience to God. He'd say it's God's will for you to treat people with respect and the honor they deserve and not treat them like sexual objects. He'd say, hey, your sexuality is important, but it does not define who you are. You see, the thing that Paul's trying to get to is this. You and I, we're called to so much more. We're called to so much more than what culture offers us. In the next verse, and he says this. He says, then each of you will learn to control their own body and live in holiness and in honor. You see, this idea of God's will, this idea of God's plan for us, it has a lot of don'ts in it. Don't watch porn, don't send nudes, don't do this, but it has a lot of things that we can do in it as well. God is calling us to value each other as more than just objects for sexual pleasure. God is calling us to value ourselves and to stop selling ourselves short and settling for less than His best. God is calling us to understand our identity as His kids, not just tied up in our sexuality, but our identity as children of God. And God is calling us to real intimacy, real relationships with Him and with others.
In 8th grade, my dad was really sick. He was dying of cancer, and 3 months before he died, he actually gave me this purity ring that I still wear. And at the time I was 13, so I didn't really think anything of it because I wasn't dating or anything, and I just knew this as like my dad's dying wish for me to stay pure until marriage. It was strange because I at first felt this, oh, if only I didn't have this stupid purity ring, then this guy would like me. And it turned out those guys were kind of jerks and they wanted me for the wrong reasons. They didn't want me for my character or my heart. They wanted me physically. I started to wrestle more with, okay, well, I made this promise to my dad who's not here anymore, and I don't really know what God says about sex or oral sex, things that come before real sex. And so I started reading the Bible. There's some stuff on it, but where I found most of my answers was actually through the Holy Spirit. There are lines that I have crossed that I do regret now. They've taught me a lot about myself, yes, but I absolutely regret some of the choices that I've made when I was in relationship with someone who I thought I was going to marry. I thought it was who God had for me. That's me justifying something that isn't what God has for me, or else I wouldn't feel convicted of it. I wouldn't feel the Holy Spirit, tugging at me, saying, don't do that. I believe it's so important to set those boundaries when you first start a relationship, before you get really invested with someone. Because the worst thing that could happen is then you break up with that person and you gave part of yourself to them. Even if you're not sure about God or what you feel about what God says about sex, you give part of yourself to someone when you do anything sexual with them. And I'm not just talking about actual sex, I'm talking about oral sex, taking your clothes off, doing any of that stuff. That is all going to feel like shame at some point. So, girls, I have been your age before, obviously, and any temptation or questioning you felt, I can almost guarantee I felt it. And what I need you to know is This is something that God designed for you to give to one person. You were designed to be gorgeous and super attractive to your husband. Whatever choices you make, like I just need you to understand that you can only give your virginity to one person. That is one of the best gifts I feel like I can give my husband. So I can say, hey, I said no to all of these people because I only wanted you because I knew God promised me you. Guys, I know it's harder to say no to sex. It's difficult, but I want you to know that if you can do that for your wife, that is so valuable, and it's cool. It shows insane discipline, and it shows more strength than the guys who will just give it up to be cool. That is when I see like, oh, that's a man. That's a man who respects his wife, respects women, isn't trying to get by on a feeling. Like he is fighting for something that is eternal. That is the value of waiting. Like no matter what mistake you have made, you can turn around. Like being closer to God is just taking a little step closer. It's turning towards Him. Like God's loving you through that, and you can still live the way the Holy Spirit wants you to live. Just listen to those convictions. Listen to the Holy Spirit. Choose now. Hey, God, I'm gonna let you lead this part of my life. This is a burden that's like, this physical need I feel like I have, that's a burden that's too heavy to carry. So God, I'm giving it to you. Like you can absolutely do that. You can absolutely change those thoughts and those needs that you feel like you have, because those aren't of you. Like that's the enemy. So it was cool to have this promise that I made to my dad for, 5 or 6 years, not even understanding what it meant. And then it coming full circle and learning, and me learning that God wanted this for me, because it takes out all of this fear of finding the right person and them not respecting me and them using me for, them using me physically. But I believe that God has this for me because it shows me the truth of love, and the truth that like all the physical stuff comes after you find this person that you want to spend the rest of your life with.
We can wait for our husband or our wife. We can live in a culture that's consumed with sex and not be consumed ourselves. We can live God's specific purpose for our life and live out His specific plan for sex. We get the power to do the right thing, and we get that through the Holy Spirit. It is our aid. He is the person who comes to us and fills us and gives us the strength and the energy to do what God's called us to do. You want power to stop looking at porn? You want power to stop selling yourself short with the opposite sex? You need the Holy Spirit. When we're faced with that conversation of like, is this line too far or is this line too far? Is it okay to do this? Is it okay to masturbate? Is it not okay to masturbate? Is same-sex attraction a sin? Is same-sex sex a sin? All of that stuff. When we're faced with all of that, here's a question that we can ask. Does this bring me closer to God? Because it's God's will that you and I would live in holiness and honor. Does this decision bring me closer to God? That's a question you can ask in every area of your life, including your sex life. You can live out God's specific design for sex, but you have to have the Holy Spirit.